January the 27th, 1985. Mr. Faust, it has been stated that you are considered by many to be the father of modern residential air conditioning. What's the story behind this statement?
Since the Carrier Corporation has long considered Willis Carrier to be the father of air conditioning, some of the members of that organization would probably consider it presumptive for me to be labeled father of modern residential air conditioning. Actually, the term was coined by a public relations man in the General Electric Company, but there is some substance to the statement. First, in 1928, I designed and installed a central air conditioning system in an apartment in New York City. This was not intended to be a commercial product, but rather a proof of concept to show the feasibility of adapting commercial air conditioning equipment to residential use. Second, in 1929 and 1930, I designed a room air conditioner, a self-contained room air conditioner for residential use. In the first year, 2 such units were made. One was installed in my apartment in Fort Wayne, Indiana. The other was used in the test laboratory of the General Electric Company. In the following year, $25 such units were manufactured and installed in various places throughout the United States. Subsequently, the General Electric Company, as a result of these 2 developments and other developments, decided to enter the air conditioning business and started commercial sales May 1st, 1932.
Mr. Fowler, who was Dr. Alexander R. Stevenson, Jr., and what was your professional relationship with him?
Dr. Alexander Stevenson was one of 3 assistants to the chief engineer of General Electric Company. He was also president of the American Society of Refrigerating Engineers in the early 1930s. He guided the development of the GE monitor top refrigerator and the formation of the refrigerator department of General Electric. He proposed the development of a room air conditioner based on principles similar to the monitor top refrigerator, and I was assigned to work under his guidance to develop such a unit. He also was responsible for helping form the air conditioning department of General Electric Company.
How did air conditioning affect the railroad industry in the 1930s, and what role did you play in providing human comfort to the railroad transportation?
In 1930 or 1931, the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad installed air conditioning on its trains between New York City and Baltimore and Washington. These units used a gas engine drive, and they were so popular, that is, the service was so popular that it practically took all of the business away from the Pennsylvania Railroad, which had more convenient terminal facilities than the Baltimore and Ohio. Pennsylvania had to respond by air conditioning its cars, and initially it used ice for this purpose. Steam ejector systems were extensively used also, and the Pullman Company installed air conditioning in Pullman cars using a dual motor drive, one motor for terminal use at 230 volts and one motor to be driven by a large 6-volt battery suspended under the cars. The General Electric Transportation Department in 1931 developed an axle-driven generator. This made it unnecessary to connect to electric supplies in terminals, and made it possible to generate electricity from the movement of the train. I was assigned to work with the Transportation Department and designed the air conditioning system for use with this axle-driven generator, and it was used extensively by a number of railroads, including the Illinois Central, New York, New Haven, and Hartford, and others.
During World War II, you were very much involved with the refrigeration units in the Victory ships. Could you tell me something about the Victory ships and your part?
The Victory ships were originally called Liberty ships and were part of the Merchant Marine operated by the U.S. Navy during World War II. The significance of their operation was that this was the first time that fresh food was supplied for the use of troops overseas. Therefore, all food carried in Victory ships had to be in refrigerated cargoes, and the Victory ships also were a supplement for troop transfer in addition to the troop liners that were used. The General Electric condensing units were selected in a contest with the three companies, General Electric, York, and Carrier, and were the first relatively high-speed condensing unit using Freon refrigerant rather than ammonia in marine service.
During the war, you also served as a consultant to the Quartermaster General on food refrigeration, and served on the as a member of the board of several war production boards. I didn't say that. And was also a member of several war production board advisory committees. What were some of your responsibilities?
I was asked to be a consultant on the development of mobile food warehouses and trailers equipped with food refrigeration systems. In the case of the War Production Board, industry advisory committees were established to assist the government in developing regulations for channeling refrigeration and air conditioning products to essential war use. My position was to represent General Electric Company in these various advisory committees, and in addition I was put in charge of the GE office in Washington, D.C., with the responsibility to guide General Electric Company to adapt refrigeration and air conditioning products to war use, including water coolers for use on U.S. Navy ships, ice cream cabinets, frozen food cabinets, and food refrigerator cabinets for officers' mess on warships, and air conditioning of ready rooms for aviators on battleships.
Mr. Faust, do you hold any patents, and if so, if you describe them, what they are, and tell us something about that?
I hold no patents myself. However, Dr. Alexander Stevenson, for whom I worked, had several patents, including an important one on the use of air cooling of condensers, which made the room air conditioner a practical device. Prior to air cooling, they were water cooled, of course.
How would you describe the HVAC&R industry during the late 1920s and 30s?
In the 20s, Carrier, York, and others extensively developed air conditioning in theaters, department stores, and large commercial applications. In the 30s, Freon was developed by the DuPont company, and there was extensive development of the market for small commercial air conditioning, especially with self-contained so-called store coolers. There was also the extensive use of room air conditioners in offices and beginning in residences.
You worked for General Electric Company for nearly 44 years, approximately from 1926 until 1970. What do you consider your most outstanding achievements?
Well, first, the pioneering development of room air conditioning and residential air conditioning, as previously discussed. Second, product planning for all of the modern air conditioning and heating products of the General Electric Company in the heating, air conditioning, and commercial refrigeration markets. And third, recognition from the industry in recognition of contributions made to ASHRAE and its predecessor societies, culminating in my election as president of ASHRAE.
In the 1950s, you served as chairman of the joint committee which initiated the merger of the American Society of Heating and Ventilation Engineers and the American Society of Refrigerating Engineers. Could you give us a little insight on what was the spirit of the two societies going into this merger?
Well, the background was that ASHVE had an initial interest in combustion of fuel, heating of buildings with steam and hot water, and ventilation in industrial and commercial occupancies. ASRE had an initial interest in ammonia refrigeration for preservation of food and production of ice, later expanded to include domestic refrigeration. With the extensive development of air conditioning in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, interests began to overlap. Greater cooperation was needed to avoid overlapping in technical programs and to reduce the burden of attendance by air conditioning engineers at meetings of the two societies. A survey at that time indicated an overlap of about 60% in the technical programs of the two societies. The effect of the merger on the heating, ventilating, and air conditioning and refrigeration industry was that it helped in the explosive growth of technology. It opened up new fields such as the quality of the environment, the use of non-depletable energy sources such as solar, and the control of noise and other applications. The effect of the merger on worldwide human comfort was, first, U.S. companies have led in the development of products and applications of products, and ASHRAE has provided the facilities and staff for exchange of technological information. 2, ASHRAE, through its international members and affiliation with similar societies throughout the world, has widely disseminated technical data. And 3, ASHRAE has assisted the U.S. delegations to standards organizations and provide the secretariat for several. Also, ASHRAE standards have formed an important base.
Mr. Faust, you were president of ASHRAE during 1963-64. What was the focus of your administration, and do you recall some of the society's accomplishments during that year?
When the merger took place in 1959, there was some dissension in both of the predecessor societies. Some of the people in the cold storage industry weren't interested in air conditioning, and some people in the heating field weren't interested in refrigeration. It was a difficult job to unify the organization, and I think great progress was made in that year. Many of the bylaws were changed to eliminate special interests and to make the society broader in its focus, thus the term exhibit of unity. Another accomplishment was the development of a sound financial base. Between 1959 and 1963, the society operated on a deficit basis. It lost some of its members due to overlapping membership, and it was only in 1963 and 64 that we were able to plan our financial affairs in a way to have a surplus rather than a deficit. A third major accomplishment was the sale of the Society's research laboratory in Cleveland and the reorientation of the research program so that research was accomplished henceforth in a number of university and other laboratories, usually 25 or 30 such laboratories contributing at any one time.
It was about let's see, you retired from GE in 1970, right?
Yes.
And it was about this time that ASHRAE recognized a need to promote collaboration with other professional societies, foundations, and government agencies in planning major research studies. What role did you play in this, and what role did you play in this?
In 1969, just prior to my retirement from General Electric Company, Paul Reese Achenbach, who was in the standards, the Bureau of Standards of the federal government, proposed as chairman of the Research and Technical Committee of ASHRAE that ASHRAE investigate collaboration with government agencies and other outside organizations. This came to the board in the form of a motion, and early in 1970, a committee called the Committee on Technical and Financial Outreach was established, and I was asked to be its chairman. We met and I was authorized on behalf of the committee to make investigative interviews with government agencies and others to see what possibilities existed to provide a technical and financial outreach. This review seemed to indicate that there were advantages to a formal organization to do this, but it seemed to be more than a committee or the chairman of a committee could accomplish on a volunteer basis. Therefore, the committee suggested that I resign as chairman, and the committee would then recommend to the board that I be retained as a consultant and spend an extensive amount of time developing this role. So the committee, the position of ASHRAE consultant for special projects was established in 1972, and I undertook this responsibility on a contractual basis from June of 1972 until June 30th of 1983. Did you want me to talk also about the accomplishments?
Yes, that's what I knew. What were some of your accomplishments, the society's accomplishments? What projects did you work on during these years that seemed the most outstanding?
There was a great deal of change taking place in the government due to the energy shortage that developed in 1973 and 74, and new agencies were formed, including the Environmental Protection Agency and an agency that preceded the U.S. Department of Energy. We worked with a number of these agencies. For instance, we worked on a project for environmental air quality with the Environmental Protection Agency. We worked on a handbook for solar energy for the National Science Foundation and the Housing and Urban Development Department. We worked on the evaluation of solar energy systems in commercial buildings, and we helped the U.S. Department of Energy to develop energy conservation standards. In the period, we also worked with other organizations. For instance, we worked with the American, the Gas Appliance Manufacturers Association and the U.S. Department of Energy on the development of warm air systems for residential use. In this period of some 11 years as ASHRAE consultant, we developed financial assistance from outside of ASHRAE in an amount well in excess of $8 million.
How do you see that during the 11 years that these projects were a benefit to the general public?
Well, we have developed standards and guidelines for economical use of energy and for the use of non-depletable energy sources. We have helped the development of good environmental conditions, better than would have been the case otherwise. And I'm sure there were other benefits which would occur to me on further study.
You are still active in ASHRAE, is that correct?
In the Society fiscal year ending in June of 1984, I was a member of the ASHRAE Government Affairs Committee. I was also a member of Technical Committee 6.7 on solar energy utilization. In June and July of 1984, I participated as one of the authors in forecasting what the air conditioning industry might be like 25 years from now. Currently, I am vice chairman of the Life Members Club, And in the coming fiscal year, I hope to be active on another ASHRAE committee.
If you had to write a message to engineers in 2010, what do you think you'd tell them? What would you say? Mm-hmm. All right.
You've asked me to state what a brief message to engineers would be in the year 2010. I think I made such a statement in the series of articles entitled Looking Ahead 25 Years, which appeared in the ASHRAE Journal, June 1984. I indicated that the future size and characteristics of the HVAC&R industry depend upon market needs, the economics of energy production, and the extent to which technological developments in building thermal enclosures, processes, systems, and products economically satisfy market needs. Taking these three subjects individually, market needs were forecast to be the production of products and services for replacement, multiple replacement, in 234 in a market of 234 to 280 million, in a market of 234 million people, and in addition providing new services for a 20% addition to this market. The economics at times seems to be clouded by the availability of energy. However, I concluded from research that I undertook that there are vast supplies of gas at great depths, and that whereas energy reserves had previously been forecast to last less than 25 years, currently, as a result of exploration at depths below 15,000 feet, the forecast of reserves has been increased to 75 years. Furthermore, if you conclude that it is feasible to explore to depths of 20,000 feet, you will find that there are large geopressured gas and hot water reserves, and that there probably is enough energy to last many hundreds of years. The third element, technological development, depends on results of current research and long-range research plans. And there appear to be three trends. One is to improve comfort and reduce load requirements of building thermal envelopes, including further development and increased use of passive solar features. The second is to select equipment and operate systems with new applications of microcomputers for dynamic response to cyclical changes, including climate, varying occupancy, and industrial loads, and thermal storage of the building and of storage elements when used in systems. There's also the continued development of lower cost and more reliable systems using non-depletable energy sources such as solar. In conclusion then, the next 25 years will provide very large and varied markets, a continued availability of energy sources at costs not excessively higher than today's costs, and many opportunities for innovative products and systems to satisfy market needs and enhance comfort, health, and safety.
Is there anything you'd like to add to this interview that we did not cover?
You asked me in one of your questions what I considered to be the top 3 accomplishments during the 44 years I worked for General Electric Company. I also consider it to be a major accomplishment that I was able to continue work as an independent consulting engineer and as a consultant to ASHRAE for the past 15 years, during which the system of special projects was developed for the society.
You will not have any event that you remember out of this meeting that will give us more pleasure than what we're about to do. We have many people who provide services to the society willingly, freely, and with all of their talent always available. But there are very few, more than our honored
guests today here, who have done it to the degree and with the consistency and with the guidance and leadership that has produced positive results and beneficial results as a consequence. I would like to introduce all of the important people in the audience. Now, the thing that's ridiculous about that is that there isn't anybody here who isn't important. Because, one, to be affiliated and take time from an ASHRAE schedule makes the event itself important. To be in the same room with our guest makes the people important. And so that we don't have any important people, so just recognize that fact and you're in good company. Now, the one other thing, though, that's a little different. ASHRAE, as an organization, has consistently recognized the value of the family participation in events. And when a man's family, who's got to know all the good stuff and all the bad stuff, respects and honors an individual, it's a tribute for us to know them better. I would like to introduce Frank's family here, who have honored us and honored him by being here. I'm not going to tell you what the relationship is until they all stand, and then I think you'll be surprised. I would like to introduce Mr. and Mrs. Robert Faust. Now hold your applause, hold your applause, hold your applause. All right. Catherine Hall. Betty Stripling. Carol Wackman. And Wendy and Laura Wackman. Now stand up, all of you, stand up. Stand up. Now, if I tell you that in this group, and we're honored that you came, there's a brother and a sister-in-law. Okay? There is a sister, there are 2 daughters, and there are 2 granddaughters. Now, I'm not going to tell you who's who. Thank you for coming, and please. The schedule of events is such that one of the things that we honor Frank for is in cutting through the piles of debris that seemed to interfere with getting something organized, described, approved, funded, criticized, critiqued, reviewed again, and ultimately come to some resolution which puts new material to the public that ASHRAE serves. In that context, we're going to respect that and going to keep this luncheon very short, because I know there are key people here who have meetings that probably are starting right now, and buses that are about to leave, and planes that are about to leave. And it is a further honor that you have come, and we appreciate it. Now, the question is, you ought to know who's up here sitting looking at you. I would like to introduce, and we'll come back to you later for your part, John Milhone, Director of the Office of Building Energy Research and Development, U.S. Department of Energy. John Milhone. Robert O. McDonald, the President-elect of the Society. Our most honored guest and dear friend and associate, Frank H. Faust. I'm Clint Phillips, and I pulled my rank last year and said you couldn't have this dinner if I didn't get to run it. So it's the last thing that I really pulled rank on, and I would not have given up easily. Richard Perry, President of the Society. And Frederick Morse, Director of the Office of Solar Heat Technologies, the U.S. Department of Energy. Now, I was asked by people who worry about these things to explain to the audience briefly, and that is a difficult task for me to honor, why are we here to honor Frank Faust? It's so patently obvious why we're here to honor Frank Faust that all I'm going to do is just mention 3 or 4 things that will put it in focus. Frank Faust is a professional engineer. You say, well, I knew that. He's a presidential member of ASHRAE. Well, I knew that. We can all say this, you see, but did you really think about it? He's a fellow of the Society. And a fellow of the Society means that he gave a contribution to technology that is outstanding. He may have been a scoundrel in the Society, but he gave to technology. A lot of people don't know the difference between a fellow and the Distinguished Service Award. I don't want to say that the guy who gets the Distinguished Service Award doesn't know anything and never did anything useful in a technical sense, but in addition, the Distinguished Service Award means that he gave freely to the services to the Society itself in great measure. He also has the Distinguished Service Award. He is not just a 50-year member of the Society. He's in that very exclusive class, which is called the distinctive, or, I'm sorry, blew that one, distinguished. So it's okay, the 2 words are the right kind. The distinguished 50-year member club, if you will, of the Society. He received a special presidential citation in 1978 from President Bruno Marabito because his services were so outstanding at that time, we just couldn't contain ourselves. We had to write a presidential citation about the value of his contribution to the Society. And he's been a consultant for our special project since May of 1972, a task which he is now, I suspect somewhat begrudgingly, relinquishing to others, simply because in the order of things, others must learn and must take over and must carry on. And he has been an instructor and a leader. Therefore, it will succeed. He became a member in 1930 of the Society. He was president of this Society in 1963. The guest book that's here, which we will give him to take with him, contains the names, Frank, of all of these very important people who have come here today. There are undoubtedly many more important people who simply are not in Washington, D.C. today, but that's their tough luck. We have the right in this room to be the ones who have signed your guest book, and that's an honor to us. Anyone who has not signed it, it will be on the desk rather briefly before Frank takes it away this afternoon. Please sign it. In that guest book, there are many testimonials. One that I would mention briefly. the East Texas chapter felt so strongly about this in Tyler, Texas, the rose capital of the world, before he left for the land of horses and whiskey in Louisville. It was 20 years ago, and they have attributed the fact that his leadership and guidance and inspiration has resulted in 25% of the membership of the East Texas chapter being consistently involved at the society level in a major fashion, in addition to their chapter and regional activities. And that is a measure of accomplishment that very few people can point to. And it's the East Texas chapter that said that. I didn't say it. I'm just quoting what they said and the letters in the book to prove it. I think that with that, we would try to say, what do we mean by consultant? Frank's role of consultant is so broad in that the relationship to our special projects, which means the things that we do in cooperation with agencies and governments that benefit the public in the technology of ASHRAE, over and above and as part of the research program of the Society, did not stop at the development of those projects and the tracking of those projects. It led into the interrelationships with many agencies of government, which no doubt was the leading factor in our establishing the Washington office of ASHRAE, which was one of the greatest things we ever did, because it put our focus to work where it is needed, followed by the Government Affairs Committee of Canada, which is a direct consequence of the contacts and the relationships made by Frank for the Society. And the application of that energy has come about because of the many inter-society groups that he has in fact caused to be formed, that we now take for granted. So I think I've said enough. That's why we're here to honor Frank Faust. There are many people who could have given perfectly appropriate testimony to that. Our two guests today are examples of that type of testimony, and we're grateful for their participation. I would like to introduce first John Milholm.
I feel honored to be here to participate in this tribute. I'd like to tell you about the first time I remember meeting Frank. This was after I had been to DOE a short time, and Maxine Savitz said, "John, we should get together, and Frank Faust is coming in town, and you should get to meet him." And Frank came in, and by this time I had met a number of people who were involved in trying to do one kind of work or another with buildings and community systems program. And I was getting used to people who were coming in and were pretty hard sales oriented. And Frank came in, he was very relaxed and very congenial, and going to sit back and comfortably started talking about how things were going, what was happening in the government in a very sort of cosmopolitan way. And we chatted, and sort of gently he brought in some subjects that he thought ASHRAE would be interested in, and I found myself involved in a very pleasant, relaxed conversation. Went for an hour, and then after I got through, I went back over my notes and what had happened, and I realized that in his own sort of quiet way, he had covered all the topics that were on his agenda, and there was a program that was spelled out that we were involved in together that involved some very useful work, but one that he slipped into my conversation, my awareness, without ever knowing. And that's been the pattern. Every month or so, Frank's been and we've been talking, and aside from agreeing on good work that needed to be done, there were very enjoyable personal experiences. And Frank, I hope you get here from time to time so that we can talk about the direction of the activities in Washington and in ASHRAE and how things are going in the sort of congenial way that is uniquely yours. And we've covered a lot of very useful work in the equipment area, in HVAC research of a variety of nature, and in the building systems area. The relationship has been very constructive, and some of the finest accomplishments that we have at the DOE Buildings Conservation Program are a result of the work that Frank nurtured, that we worked through with members of ASHRAE in one area or another. He also helped me deal with some of the hottest coals that came along my way. We have, even at DOE, some four-letter words like BEPS and EBTER. And when I had these kinds of, I said, well, Frank, now is the time for me to kind of cajole you into helping. And ASHRAE and Frank, as long as we were focusing on the technical issues involved in those areas, was very helpful in providing its unique expertise in showing and advising the federal government about how to deal with some of these very ticklish problems. With this sort of combination of congeniality, a high level of technical competence, concern about the ASHRAE organization making a constructive contribution to research, and with a courage that sometimes required sticking your neck out or taking part in something that wasn't all peaches and cream. Frank was always there, and as such, I think he was sort of symbolically representative of the ASHRAE Association itself, because I think those same characteristics describe what ASHRAE has done through the years. One of the, in addition to this, one of the things that I admire about Frank is his concern about the precision of the use of the English language. Now, I got into this business from doing some writing and some editing, so this has been an area that I have a particular tender spot for. And I'll have to tell you that not all engineers are uniquely focused on this as being an area of primary concern. And a story that you may have heard from Frank before, I remember it was that he likes to tell, is about a man who caught his wife in bed with another man. And the man said, "I am surprised." And his wife responded, said, "No, I am surprised. You are astonished." It's no surprise to any of us that Frank is here and that we have a chance to give you the kind of indication of appreciation that you so richly deserve.
Mr. Fred Morse.
Frank, I too am honored to be here today. In preparing the few words I'm going to say, I thought back to also the first time that I met Frank. It was 1974. Congress had passed the Solar Heating and Cooling Demonstration Act, in which it asked us to demonstrate the feasibility of using solar for heating and cooling buildings. Of course, the technology was unproven, much more complex than anyone realized. We had an inexperienced team of people, and I think Frank sensed the flapping around that was going on, and he just walked in one day with a feeling that somehow ASHRAE, with its tremendous knowledge of this field, could help then the National Science Foundation succeed in this program. And the question was how. And I would like to emphasize that as engineers, the biggest step is to define the problem. Frank very quickly figured out what the problem was, and I'd like to give you a few examples of some of the activities that Frank was instrumental in bringing about in the Department of Energy programs. When we first started, we had to identify those systems that were available and ready for the demonstrations. And Frank said, "I think we can help you do that." and he organized an industry panel, and they looked at all of this and pointed out that not many of them were ready and able for the demonstration. But we had no data, and we were required to proceed, and we did proceed, and they failed precisely as the ASHRAE review team predicted they would. Frank then had the courage to come back to us and put together an industry review team to review the first few series of demonstration projects. And that team was invaluable in helping us sort out the good projects from the less good projects. Frank also was instrumental in figuring out that one of the key problems soon was going to be the lack of standards. And with his knowledge of the consensus procedures, Frank negotiated, worked out the essence of a contract that allowed DOE to accelerate that process, and the now famous ASHRAE 9377, 9477, which has really been the backbone of this solar industry, was accelerated by at least a year or two. Frank has organized numerous technical reviews for our programs and has been instrumental in many key documents which are now ASHRAE documents. It said in the letter that Frank has helped build a relationship between ASHRAE and the government. Let me tell you, there cannot be a more difficult partner than DOE in any relationship. Frank had to sit through a 9-month negotiation process for a $4,000 purchase order. And he would keep calling me saying, do they really want to do an audit of all the ASHRAE members? Frank had incredible patience in dealing with a turmoil that is unprecedented in the private sector. 7 assistant secretaries, each with different points of view, and throughout it all, Frank kept a steady eye on the target and consistently brought us the best of ASHRAE's capability. And I think to a large extent the success of the solar program so far has been due to a large part to ASHRAE's help, and especially to Frank, who had the skill to figure out how to make that partnership effective. And so my only request, Frank, is whatever you do in the future, I do wish you well, but please leave a phone number just in case. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John and Fred. There are many who could have added to this. Sometimes it's better to just have a good example than to try to cover the waterfront. And Frank, you realize that's not the limit. We had to settle some arguments about which two were going to get the prize. See? All right. And we did. We can be assertive too. We've learned that from you. We want you to have this guest book, Frank. And let me hold it here for you, and so you can get a good photograph here of this book. Because it chronicles many things that we have not said today that would be, I'm sure, stronger than we have said. So again, what you've heard today is as an example. The signatures of your many friends in here speak for themselves. We thought that perhaps Frank might have been overlooked in his career and not had enough certificates to cover the broken plaster in the house. So we decided to give him a certificate. However, we decided to give him a certificate that would be able to stand on its own, you see. Now, Frank, I caution you, the bottom falls off. So be sure to put your hand under it. But I would like to read to Frank. This is a certificate, by the way. When I was told this is the certificate, I said, yeah, I know I told you to get a good certificate, but certificate's made out of paper. The guy says, not necessarily. This is a better certificate. We agree. This is a certificate. I'm going to read it. who, since 1972, this is talking about his current assignment, he has already retired from more activities than most of us are ever going to get into, has made continuous and valuable contributions of his time, interest, talent, and experience as ASHRAE consultant for special projects to further research and development for the public benefit. We, the undersigned, do wholeheartedly express our sincere appreciation of his efforts. And it is signed by ASHRAE presidents from 1971 to 1983 and by the chairman of the Research and Technical Committee from 1971 to 1983. Now, you can have this, but first we want to hear from you.
President Perry, immediate past President Phillips, ladies and gentlemen, usually I'm not at a loss for words. Temporarily I am. This is the most impressive occasion that I've attended. I particularly want to thank Clint Phillips, John Milhone, and Fred Morris for their presentations. I also want to accord special recognition to Dr. Maxine Savitz, who is sitting up at the upper level. Maxine, would you stand up for a moment? Dr. Savitz, as Assistant Secretary for Conservation and Renewable Energy of the Department of Energy, now retired, deserves credit for her dedicated efforts and leadership involving cooperation with ASHRAE when successive Congresses required her to be both for and against federally edicted building energy performance standards. Unfortunately, I do not have time to recognize the many representatives that are here, but I do appreciate their attendance and support. Before addressing the subject of benefits of ASHRAE research, I would like to give you some personal information that has never before been revealed, not even to my family. At home, we have a painting of a real century plant at a known location. This plant gets its name because it is supposed to bloom every century. However, we have authenticated the fact that this particular plant has bloomed twice during my professional career. If this seems like an exaggeration, consider that I was born in the year that one of our predecessor societies was founded. Our father was in the creamery business. When I was 6 years old, he took me to his creamery where he was installing a new Frick ammonia refrigerating machine and building a cold storage warehouse. When completed, he taught me how to charge the system with ammonia and control it by observing the frost line and on the suction pipe, as the expansion valve was gradually opened by hand. You know, there were no automatic thermostatic valves at that time. This experience of helping to install and control equipment enables me to claim being the youngest refrigeration central plant operating engineer on record. But of course, you will understand that the occasional ammonia contamination of the cream being churned into butter
occurred only in my learning period as a 6-year-old engineer. My professional career as an engineer in the heating, refrigerating, and air conditioning industry started upon graduation from college. If you count my 12 years as a part-time operating engineer, my 44 years with General Electric Company, and the additional 13 years since then working principally for ASHRAE, you will see that this totals 69 years. I hope I have convinced you that I know what I am talking about when I address you on the subject of benefits of ASHRAE research. Seriously, I would like to spend approximately 2 minutes each on 4 topics. These are significant events, accomplishments, benefits, and the future. As to significant events, research started in our younger predecessor society, the ASHRAE, in 1911. This, I remind you, is the year I became a 6-year-old operating engineer. It also started in our older predecessor society, ASHRAE, in 1919. Research by the societies has continued since then and will reach nearly $1 million in the next fiscal year with internally generated funds, not including any funds that we obtain by cooperative research with outside organizations. The research programs were merged when ASHRAE was formed in 1959. I had the good fortune to be the first chairman of the joint committee that made studies leading to the merger and resulted in better coordinated research programs. During my term as president, we accomplished 2 things. We eliminated deficit financing. For a period, the society had trouble operating within its means. This enabled us to become financially strong, and we have remained that way ever since. We eliminated our research laboratory in favor of subcontracting, which gave us more flexibility and lower costs. In 1970, I was appointed the chairman of the Committee on Technical and Financial Outreach, which greatly expanded our research to include cooperation with outside agencies. In 1972, at the recommendation of the TFO committee, I became the ASHRAE consultant. Now, 2 on accomplishments. Essentially, what we have been able to do with my help is to develop methods of undertaking cooperative research and other technical activities with outside organizations, which has resulted in greater scope and magnitude for the society. We have learned about the needs and programs of government and others with interests similar to our own. As proof of this, I, with help from staff, have negotiated cooperative research and technical projects in more than 100 contracts with more than 30 governmental and outside agencies, which I was going to read, but it's so comprehensive I don't think I need to do it. I might mention a few: American Institute of Architects Research Foundation, Argonne National Laboratory, Brookhaven National Laboratory, Department of Energy, Environmental Protection Agency, Gas Research Institute, Health Education Welfare Department, Housing and Urban Development Department, almost National Laboratory, and so on. We have learned contract procedures and have negotiated contracts valued at many millions of dollars. We have constructively influenced federal research and development programs and federal legislation related to them. We have developed policies and procedures for the guidance of our staff and various committees, and have trained staff in the proper solicitation and acceptance of ASHRAE special projects. We have accomplished all of these things without building an internal research staff and becoming a management support contractor, sometimes referred to as a Beltway bandit. 2, without competing with our members. 3, without losing our independence and freedom of action. And 4, with a sound financial base. Three, as to benefits. Research is necessary to create new technological opportunities and fill voids in knowledge so that buildings, systems, and products can be improved in their design, application, and use for the good of the general public. Research forms basis for the development of standards, the preparation of design and application manuals, and education through conferences and workshops and technical programs. All of these activities are included in our ASHRAE special project activities. The types of research sponsored by ASHRAE and the resulting technical activities produce many benefits for the good of the public, including the following benefits with examples. 1, safety to life and property. For instance, a new design manual for smoke control and seminars on implementation of this procedure in codes and standards. 2, health protection. Standards for infiltration and ventilation. 3, enhancing comfort. Standards for comfort. 4, reducing fuel costs by energy conservation. 5, protecting natural resources of depletable reserves by using solar energy and daylighting. 6, reduce building costs by more cost-effective design. 7, decrease costs of systems and equipment by better design and control. And 8, increase reliability and reduce service expense. That leaves 4, the future. What happens in the future will depend in part on economic, business, and political factors and how the society responds to them. It will also depend upon how well we control the exponential growth factor in energy use, as so well presented by Dr. Bartlett at the plenary session on Monday. Economic factors are improving as we emerge from a recession into a cyclical period of higher levels of business, accompanied by lower fuel costs. This may temporarily slow down efforts to